The train to London had just pulled into Paddington Station when Hercule Poirot received the letter. It was hand-delivered, the envelope crisp and heavy, sealed with a strange insignia, a coiled serpent embossed in red wax. Poirot, ever meticulous, turned it over in his gloved hands before breaking the seal. The message inside was short, but it carried an unsettling weight. Monsieur Poirot, I wish to confess to a murder I have not yet committed. I implore you come at once. Joseph. Emberton, 17 Highgate Hill. Hercule Poirot arched a finely groomed eyebrow. A confession before the crime? The absurdity intrigued him at once. He glanced at his companion, Captain Hastings, who had been peering over his shoulder with growing astonishment. "Well, Hastings, what do you make of this?" Poirot murmured Hastings. Let out a low whistle. "A madman, I'd wager. Or a prankster." Poirot shook his head. "Non, mon ami. If a man wishes to confess, it means he believes there will be a crime. Either he intends to commit it, or he tapped the letter. Eyes gleaming, he knows it will happen." The drizzle had thickened into a steady rain by the time the taxi brought them to the grand townhouse at 17 Highgate Hill. The gas lamps flickered, casting long, wavering shadows on the cobbled street. Poirot and Hastings stepped onto the stoop, and even before Hastings could raise his hand to knock, the door opened. A man stood in the threshold, a tall, gaunt figure with an air of quiet desperation. His face was drawn, his dark eyes hollow, as if he had spent weeks without sleep. He swallowed visibly, stepping aside. "You received my letter?" "Indeed, Monsieur Emberton," Poirot said smoothly, stepping inside. "Now, tell me, who is it you intend to murder?" Emberton flinched. "I don't know," he whispered. Hastings, midway through removing his damp coat, blinked. "What do you mean, you don't know?" The man's hands twisted together. "I only know that it will happen. I dreamt it, over and over. A man will die, and I will be the one to kill him. But I don't know who he is, or why it must happen." He exhaled shakily. "All I know is that by tomorrow night I will have murdered someone." Silence thickened in the dimly lit foyer. Poirot observed the man keenly, noting the nervous flicker of his gaze, the tremor in his fingers. He motioned to a sitting room, where a fire smoldered in the hearth. They took their seats, and Poirot laced his fingers together. "Describe this dream to me, monsieur." Emberton nodded, sinking into a chair. "I see a man in a dark coat. His back is to me. We are in a study, a grand one, with wood-paneled walls. He speaks, but I can never hear the words. Then I raise my hand, and suddenly he is falling. There is blood on the carpet, on my hands, and I know that I have killed him." He closed his eyes, pained. "Every night the same vision. Moan." "D.U.," murmured Hastings. "But dreams aren't real." Emberton shook his head vehemently. "No, this is different. I feel it in my bones. I know this is not a dream of the past, but of the future." Poirot watched him carefully, then turned his gaze. Poirot turned to Inspector Hale. "It is most curious, mon ami, that in a house filled with people, no one saw the bride leave, and yet she is not here. We must ask, was there someone who had reason to ensure this wedding did not take place? A hush fell over the room. Eyes darted nervously between guests. Then there is the question of the glove. Poirot continued, twirling it in his fingers. Such a delicate thing, left deliberately, I suspect. The smudge, it tells me something, but not yet everything. Hale sighed. So what do you propose, Poirot? Poirot smiled, the glint of a challenge in his eyes. I propose we begin. At the beginning. A bride does not simply disappear on her wedding day without a reason. And I, Hercule Poirot, will uncover it. Poirot moved through the bride's chambers with careful, measured steps, his gaze sweeping over the details that others had dismissed. The dressing table, adorned with silver hairbrushes and delicate perfume bottles, remained undisturbed save for the solitary white glove. The wardrobe stood ajar, but nothing seemed hurriedly taken. A wedding gown still hung from its stand, its lace train cascading like frozen water. Inspector Hale, ever the methodical policeman, turned his attention to the windows, pressing against their frames. No sign of forced entry. And the door, locked from the inside until the maid came knocking. It doesn't add up. Poirot, Poirot agreed, tilting his head. It does not add up unless one considers that the pieces were arranged deliberately. He turned, stepping lightly across the thick carpet. Where is this maid? Sarah, the nervous young woman from earlier, was brought forward. She clutched the edge of her apron as she spoke, eyes darting between Poirot and the inspector. I? Knocked just before 10, sir. Miss Celeste was supposed to be finishing her hair, but when she didn't answer, I got worried. She was never late for anything. Her voice wavered slightly. So I tried the door. It was unlocked. Poirot's mustache twitched. You are certain? Yes, sir. I thought I would find her inside, but she was gone. Poirot's fingers tapped against his lapel. You did not think to enter earlier, mademoiselle? Sarah swallowed. No, sir. I mean, I didn't think anything was wrong. But I swear, that door was locked when I left her earlier in the morning. I heard the bolt slide. Poirot exchanged a glance with Hale. If the door had been locked after. Sarah had last seen the bride, yet was later found unlocked with no sign of a struggle. Then someone had unbolted it from the inside. But if Celeste had left of her own accord, why would she have taken nothing? No cloak, no personal effects, only vanished like mist. The detective's gaze returned to the single glove. Lifting it once more, he studied the faint smudge on its pristine fabric. Poirot was not a man prone to impulse, but something about that mark intrigued him. Inspector, a candle, if you please. Hale frowned, but gestured for a footman to oblige. The flickering flame was brought forward, illuminating the room with a soft glow. Poirot held the glove close, studying the dark stain in the shifting light. Then, with a small nod, he handed it back. This is not dust, nor common dirt, he mused. It is soot, but not from the hearth. He gestured toward the fireplace. In the corner, it's great, empty, and spotless. No, this is of a finer sort. A residue left only by certain materials when burned. Hale exhaled through his nose. So what does that tell us? Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned his attention back to the bride's wardrobe. His fingers ghosted over the gowns, the neatly folded silks and lace-trimmed bodices. Then, quite suddenly, he paused. Reaching in, he pinched the edge of a sleeve and brought it into the light, there a faint smudge. The same fine soot, almost invisible against the pale fabric. Poirot's sharp eyes gleamed. This tells us, mon ami, that our missing bride was. In the presence of fire, a ripple of uncertainty passed through the room. Hale, rubbing his jaw, glanced around the chamber. But there was no fire here. And none of the staff mentioned anything out of place? Poirot nodded. Then we must ask ourselves where in this house does one find soot, but no fire? A flicker of realization crossed the inspector's face. The answer was obvious once, spoken aloud. The servants' passage. The old chimney flue runs through it. Without another word, the two men strode from the room, leaving a cluster of anxious guests behind. The corridors of Thornbridge Manor twisted in familiar, stately elegance, but beneath its grandeur lay another world, the narrow, hidden servants. Passages that wound through the house like veins beneath its skin. Poirot, leading the way with careful precision, ran his fingers along the paneling as they moved deeper into the recesses of the manor. Then, quite suddenly, he stopped. A section of the wall bore faint marks, barely perceptible. Poirot pressed his palm against it, and with a soft click, the panel gave way. A narrow door swung open, revealing the dimly lit passage beyond. Stale air whispered past them, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of soot and cold stone. Hale muttered a curse under his breath. I should have thought of this sooner. Poirot merely smiled, stepping inside. The passage slopped downward, following the path of an old, disused chimney shaft that had once been part of the manor's older wing. And there, in the dust upon the stone floor, was the unmistakable imprint of footprints, small, delicate ones. Poirot crouched, studying them with interest. She was here. His fingers traced the disturbed dust. But she was not alone. A second set of footprints accompanied the first, heavier and more deliberate. Not the hurried scurry of a frightened woman, but the measured steps of someone leading rather than following. Poirot's gaze narrowed. The bride was taken. Mon ami. Hale's expression hardened. But by who? Poirot straightened, dusting off his hands. That is the question, is it not? And yet, I suspect we are closer than we think. His eyes gleamed. Tell me, Inspector, have you observed something curious among our gathered guests? Hale frowned. You mean beyond the obvious? Poirot smiled thinly. We. There are those who are alarmed, those who are worried, and then there is one. Who is waiting? Hale's jaw tightened. Who? Poirot's gaze drifted, his mind already assembling the pieces of the puzzle. Patience, mon ami. First, let us see where these footprints lead, and then we shall confront the truth. Poirot straightened, his sharp gaze fixed on the footprints before him. The passage was narrow, the air thick with the scent of soot and aged stone. The prints led further into darkness, but Poirot did not advance just yet. He had gathered what? He needed Celeste had not fled. She had been led, perhaps even coerced. And someone within Thornbridge Manor knew precisely where she had gone. With a nod to Inspector Hale, he stepped back into the light of the main corridor, closing the hidden panel behind him. The manor's grandeur stretched before them once more, its gilded chandeliers and rich tapestries a stark contrast to the cold, secret passageways beneath. Guests and servants alike had gathered in uneasy clusters, their eyes filled with questions and apprehension. But beneath the worry, Poirot sensed something else, a quiet tension, the kind that only arises when truths are being carefully measured before being spoken. Hale, adjusting his cuffs, cleared his throat. Best we start talking to them properly. Someone here knows something. Poirot smiled thinly. Ah, but of course, mon ami. And we shall listen very carefully. They began with Henry Vavasor. The groom had remained by the drawing-room fireplace, his fingers curled into fists as he stared into the embers. He turned sharply as Poirot approached. "Have you found her?" His voice was tight, the controlled urgency of a man grasping at any shred of hope. Poirot studied him for a long moment. "Tell me, monsieur, your bride, was she happy to be married?" Henry stiffened. "Of course she was." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet she has vanished. Surely you must consider, even for a moment, that perhaps she left by choice." A muscle twitched in Henry's jaw. "No," he said firmly. "Celeste loved me. She wouldn't do this, even if she were frightened?" Poirot asked softly. Henry's gaze darkened. "Frightened? Of what?" Poirot let the question linger before responding. "Oh, perhaps of something she discovered, or something she was forced to conceal." His eyes flicked to Henry's best man, Lawrence Darnley, who had been watching the exchange with uncomfortable attentiveness. "And you, Monsieur Darnley, you were with the groom before the ceremony, were you not?" Lawrence hesitated, his fingers tightening around the armrest of the chair. "Yes," he admitted. "Henry and I were together until just before the wedding. I left him only when the guests started arriving, and during that time, did either of you see Mademoiselle Celeste?" "No," Lawrence said quickly. "I mean, of course not. She was preparing, wasn't she?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "Ah, and yet someone saw her last. Someone heard her voice before she disappeared." He turned slightly, his gaze settling upon Lady Montclair, the mother of the bride. She had been sitting rigidly, her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap. At Poirot's attention, she exhaled sharply. "What are you suggesting, Monsieur Poirot?" "Only that your daughter did not vanish into thin air, madam, and that someone here knows more than they have said." Lady Montclair lifted her chin. "I spoke to her last," she admitted, her voice brittle. "It was early, just before she went to dress. I wished to speak to her alone, and what was discussed?" She hesitated, then lowered her gaze. "I reminded her of the importance of this marriage." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And did she require such reminding?" Lady Montclair's lips pressed together. She was nervous. All young brides are, but was it merely nerves? Poirot took a step closer. "Tell me, madam, Was your daughter fond of Monsieur Vavasor?" Lady Montclair's expression barely wavered, but Poirot caught the flicker of hesitation. She understood her duty. She said carefully, "Ah," Poirot murmured. "Understanding, but not love. She would have been happy, Lady Montclair," said stiffly. In time, Poirot's gaze did not leave hers. And yet, she was not there to say her vows. A taut silence settled over the room. Poirot turned to the young maid, Sarah, who still lingered near the door, twisting her apron between trembling fingers. "You were the first to notice her missing, were you not?" Sarah nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, and before that. Did you see her?" Sarah hesitated. "Only briefly. I brought her tea earlier in the morning, as I always do. Did she say anything unusual?" Sarah bit her lip. She seemed restless. Kept looking at the clock. Poirot nodded slowly, as though she were expecting something. "I suppose so, sir." Poirot glanced at Hale before turning back to the room at large. His voice, when he spoke again, was deliberate. "And now, Miss Amos, let me tell you what I have observed. There are those among us who are worried, truly worried, for the fate of Mademoiselle Celeste. And yet there are others whose concerns lie elsewhere. There are those who wish only to appear concerned, and those who are watching, waiting, as though they already know the end of this tale." A heavy pause. Then Hale muttered, "And who, exactly, do you suspect fits the last description?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, mon ami, that is what we shall soon uncover." Poirot allowed the silence to stretch, letting his words settle into the minds of those gathered in the grand drawing-room of Thornbridge Manor. Faces shifted in discomfort. Glances darted about like trapped birds searching for escape. But Poirot had no intention of letting them flee from the truth. Somewhere within this room lay the key to Celeste Montclair's disappearance. It was merely a matter of uncovering which thread, when pulled, would unravel the entire deception. He turned his attention back to Henry Vavasor, the anxious groom who stood stiffly by the fireplace. "Monsieur, I must ask, did Mademoiselle Celeste ever speak to you of doubts regarding this marriage?" Henry's eyes darkened. "She was nervous, yes, but that's normal, isn't it? Every bride feels some hesitation before taking such a step." Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, tilting his head. "Nerves, perhaps. But fear? That is a different matter entirely. And yet, when I ask if she was afraid, no one here seems willing to answer." Lawrence Darnley shifted uncomfortably at Henry's side. "Look, Poirot, this is absurd. Celeste wouldn't have run away, not like this." Poirot's gaze flicked toward him. "Ah, you are quite insistent, monsieur. But tell me, what makes you so certain?" Lawrence hesitated, his posture tightening. "I just know Celeste, that's all. She loved Henry." Poirot observed him carefully. "You speak of love, but love is a peculiar thing, n'est-ce pas? Some love is given freely, while other love is expected." He let his words hang, watching Lawrence's reaction. A flicker of something crossed the man's face, something that might have been resentment, or perhaps regret. Poirot turned away before Lawrence could speak, letting his attention drift toward Lady Montclair once more. "Madam, we spoke of duty before, and you assured me that your daughter understood hers. But duty alone does not explain this disappearance. If Celeste did not leave willingly, then someone made sure she was removed." Lady Montclair's lips pressed into a thin line. "You imply that someone in this house wished to prevent the marriage, perhaps. Or perhaps someone wished to ensure that it took place under different circumstances." Poirot's gaze swept across the room. "Consider, mes amis, how many interests were entangled in this union. We have wealth, legacy, position, and yet also secrets, regrets, and concealed truths. Tell me, who among you benefits most from this wedding, and who, if it were to fail, would suffer the most?" Inspector Hale, who had remained silent until now, cleared his throat. "We should start with the financials. If Miss Montclair vanished, who stands to gain?" Poirot nodded approvingly. "An excellent question, mon ami." He turned toward Lady Montclair. "Madam, forgive my bluntness, but your daughter's marriage would have united two very powerful families. Would it not have strengthened the Montclair name?" Lady Montclair exhaled sharply. "Of course it would have. That is why she caught herself schooling her features. That is why she had no reason to flee." Poirot's mustache twitched. "No reason, madam? And yet it is often precisely when a person appears to have no reason to run that they are given one." A rustling sound came from the far side of the room, where a slender figure had been standing in uneasy silence. A young woman, elegantly dressed but anxious, shifted beneath Poirot's scrutiny. His sharp eyes softened slightly as he regarded her. "Mademoiselle Evelyn," he said smoothly, "you are Celeste's cousin, are you not?" Evelyn Montclair nodded hesitantly. "Yes, you were close." She hesitated. "We grew up together." Poirot's voice gentled. "And did she confide in you?" Evelyn swallowed, glancing toward Lady Montclair before nodding, almost imperceptibly. "She was unsure," she admitted at last. "Not about Henry exactly, but about everything. She felt trapped, like her entire future had been decided. For her." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Did she speak of leaving?" Evelyn hesitated. "Not outright. But she spoke of choices, of paths not taken." Lady Montclair's voice cut through the air, sharp as a blade. "This is nonsense. Celeste knew her responsibilities. She was not some reckless girl who would abandon her family for foolish whims." Poirot studied her. "Ah, but madam, do we not all do foolish things when we believe we have no other option?" A cold silence fell over the room. Poirot turned his thoughts inward. Every piece of this puzzle spoke of a tangled web, one spun from conflicting desires, hidden motives. He saw the edges of them now. Henry's desperation, Lady Montclair's iron will, Lawrence's unease, Evelyn's quiet guilt. And yet none of them explained the soot-stained glove, the footprints in the hidden passage. Poirot straightened. "Tell me, where is Reginald?" Inspector Hale blinked. "Reginald, the butler," Poirot said smoothly. "He has served this house for many years, has he not?" Hale frowned. We questioned the staff. None of them had anything of note to report. Poirot gave a small, knowing smile. Ah, mon ami. But it is not what they report that interests me, it is what they choose not to say a moment later. Reginald was summoned. The elderly butler appeared composed, but Poirot saw the minute tension in the way he held himself, the way his gaze flickered to Lady Montclair before settling on the detective. Poirot did not waste time. Monsieur, you have been in service to this house for many years, oui? Reginald inclined his head. Indeed, sir, you know its secrets. The hidden passages, the locked doors. Poirot watched him closely. Tell me, did Mademoiselle Celeste leave this house through the front door? Reginald hesitated, just for a second. A fraction of a second too long. Poirot's voice softened. Monsieur, I do not believe you mean harm. But you know something. And I suspect you are protecting someone. Reginald's jaw tensed. His gaze flicked again, but this time toward Evelyn. It was so quick, so fleeting, that most would have missed it. Poirot did not, and in that moment, the web of deception tightened. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, he murmured, the picture becomes clearer. Inspector Hale stood tall, exhaling through his nose as he gestured toward Reginald. Well, out with it. If you know something about Miss Montclair's disappearance, now's the time to speak. Reginald's hands clasped behind his back, his gaze once again flickering to Evelyn. Poirot saw the weight of hesitation pressing upon him. The butler was a man accustomed to discretion, to loyalty, but also to a lifetime of observing the family's secrets unravel in whispered conversations behind closed doors. Finally, he exhaled, his voice steady but low. The young miss. She did not leave through the front door. Murmurs rippled through the room. Henry stepped forward, his face etched with disbelief. Then where did she go? How did she get out? Reginald hesitated again, then said, There is a servant's passage, hidden behind the paneling in the library. It leads to an exterior door at the side of the manor. Few know of it, but Miss Montclair did. Poirot nodded. He had suspected as much, but the question remained, had Celeste used it to flee, or had someone forced her through it? Inspector Hale, eager with the momentum of what seemed to be a breakthrough, signaled to one of his men. Search the passage. If she went through there, we might find something useful. Henry turned sharply to Evelyn. Did you know about this? Did Celeste tell you she was planning to leave? Evelyn paled. No, of course not. If she had. She stopped, pressing her lips together. Poirot watched her carefully. The girl was frightened, but there was more than fear in her eyes. Guilt clung to her like a shadow. A commotion in the hallway drew their attention. One of Hale's men rushed back into the drawing room, breathless, holding something in his gloved hand. Sir, we found this in the passage. A delicate hairpin adorned with a small pearl rested in the officer's palm. Henry made a choked noise. That's Celeste's. She wore it last night. Lady Montclair exhaled sharply, bracing herself against a chair. Then she did leave through the passage. Lawrence frowned, running a hand through his dark hair. But why? Hale's men continued their search, and it wasn't long before a more alarming discovery was made. Just beyond the hidden door, beneath a thick layer of leaves, lay a torn strip of fabric, white silk. A few steps further, the soil appeared disturbed, footprints barely visible in the fading light. The implication was clear. Celeste had left, and someone had followed. Poirot crouched near the fabric, brushing his fingertips over it. The edges were uneven, torn rather than cut. She struggled. He murmured, half to himself. Or she was taken. Hale straightened, turning to Poirot. It's enough to confirm foul play. We need to search the grounds thoroughly. Whoever took her may not have gone far. Poirot did not object. He watched as the inspector's men spread across the estate, questioning servants, peering into the thick hedges that bordered the property. The hours stretched long into the evening, and the weight of the case settled heavily over the manor. Then, just as the last light of day began to fade, a voice rang out, "Inspector, we've found something." The party rushed toward the western edge of the estate, where the trees thickened into a small wooded area. There, beneath the low-hanging branches, a body lay sprawled in the undergrowth. For one chilling moment, the world held its breath. Then Henry surged forward. Celeste. Poirot caught his arm before he could move any closer. "Non, monsieur?" "Wait." Henry struggled against him, but Poirot's grip was firm. "Let the inspector do his work," he murmured. Hale stepped forward cautiously, crouching beside the still figure. The woman's gown, a soft ivory shade, was stained with earth. Dark hair fanned across her pale face. Poirot's sharp gaze took in every detail: the unnatural stillness of her limbs, the glint of something metallic near her outstretched fingers. One of Hale's men carefully turned the body. A collective gasp rippled through the group. It was not Celeste Montclair. It was a young maid from the household. Evelyn let out a strangled noise. "That's Marie. She's one of Celeste's maids," Hale cursed under his breath. "Then where the hell is Celeste?" Poirot crouched beside the girl, his keen gaze sweeping over her form. There was no visible wound, no sign of blood. Her fingers were curled around something. Poirot gently pried them open, revealing a delicate silver pendant. It bore the crest of the Montclair family. Poirot turned to Reginald. "Monsieur, did Mademoiselle Celeste own such a piece?" The butler hesitated. "No, but Lady Montclair does." All eyes snapped toward the matriarch. Lady Montclair stood still, her face unreadable. Henry's voice was hoarse. "Mother," Poirot examined the pendant carefully. "Fascinating. The lady's pendant, found in the hands of a murdered maid. Tell me, madam, how do you explain this?" Lady Montclair's lips parted, but before she could speak, one of the officers shouted from a distance, "Tracks leading further into the woods." Someone else came through here. Hale's jaw tightened. Then Celeste may still be alive. Lawrence turned to Henry. If she was taken, then the maid Marie might have tried to help her. Poirot nodded. And for her efforts, she was silenced. The authorities sprang into action, the search renewed with desperate energy. But Poirot, ever still, remained beside Marie's lifeless form. He stared at the pendant in his palm, at the disturbed soil beneath her, at the faint hint of something not quite right, a false victory. They were rushing forward, believing. The case had just taken a decisive turn. But Poirot knew better. The real criminal was still among them, and seen in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again, Poirot remained crouched beside the lifeless form of Marie, his fingertips grazing the delicate pendant she had clutched in death. It was a curious thing, a piece belonging to Lady Montclair, yet found in the hands of a murdered maid. The others were rushing forward, seeking footprints, a trail, anything that might lead them to Celeste, but Poirot knew better. The answer did not lie ahead, it lay behind them. Hidden in the shadows of the past, he stood abruptly, dusting off his hands. Mon cher Inspector, allow your men to pursue their quarry, but for now we must return to the house. There is something just beyond my grasp, like a thread waiting to be pulled. Hale shot him a frustrated glance, but gave a short nod. Fine, but make it quick. If Celeste is out there, she won't have much time. The group retraced their steps to the manor, where the air was thick with unease. Lady Montclair sat stiffly. In a chair, her gaze fixed on the pendant Poirot still held. Henry stood beside her, his jaw clenched, while Lawrence paced near the fireplace. Evelyn lingered at the edge of the room, arms wrapped around herself, her face a mask of unreadable emotion. Poirot turned the pendant over in his palm, inspecting its craftsmanship. "Madam, you say this belongs to you, oui?" Lady Montclair's voice was steady, but there was a tightness beneath it. "Yes. It was a gift from my late husband," Poirot hummed thoughtfully. "And yet it was found in the hands of your maid, who met a most unfortunate end this evening." He watched her reaction closely, but she did not flinch. "Tell me." "Madam, when did you last see it?" Her fingers brushed against her throat, as if only now realizing the absence of the piece. I don't recall. It must have been taken from my dressing table." "Curious," Poirot murmured. He turned his gaze to Reginald, who had remained silent, watching with an expression of quiet understanding. "Monsieur, you have served this family for many years, non?" Reginald nodded. "Since before Master Henry was born." "Then tell me, do you recall another time when tragedy befell this household? Something buried in the past?" The butler's eyes flickered with something unreadable. For the first time, he hesitated. Henry frowned. "Poirot, what are you getting at?" Poirot let the room settle into silence before he spoke again. "This crime, this disappearance of Mademoiselle Celeste, it is not just an isolated event. Non, it has roots that stretch back further than we have looked." Reginald exhaled, his shoulders stiffening. "There was another incident, long ago, one the family does not speak of." Lady Montclair's head snapped up, her lips thinning. "Reginald," the butler pressed on, his voice heavy with old sorrow, "it was over 20 years ago. The Montclairs had a governess, Marguerite Dufresne, a bright young woman, well loved by the children. But then one night, she vanished. A hush fell over the room. Poirot's expression did not change, though. His eyes gleamed with sharp interest. Vanished, you say? Reginald nodded. It was as if she had stepped into the night and simply disappeared. No trace of her was ever found. Henry looked at his mother in disbelief. You never told me this. Lady Montclair's voice was taut. Because it was a painful, senseless loss. We searched for her for months, but there was no sign. The authorities suspected she had run away. Poirot tilted his head. And did she? Reginald's hands tightened behind his back. No, she had no reason to. His voice dropped to a whisper. And she was with child. The words sent a ripple through the room. Lawrence's pacing halted. Wait. You mean Reginald's? Jaw tightened. Yes. She was pregnant. And she claimed the father was a Montclair. All eyes turned to Lady Montclair, whose face had gone pale. Henry took a sharp breath. You knew. Lady Montclair's hands curled into fists. It was a scandal that threatened to ruin us. I did what I had to do to protect this family. Poirot's voice was gentle, yet firm. Madam, did you know? The father of the child. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, My husband. Silence stretched long and heavy. Poirot sighed, as though he had already suspected as much. And when? Mademoiselle Marguerite vanished. What did your husband do? Lady Montclair's throat worked as she swallowed. He claimed innocence. Said he had nothing to do with it. But I knew him. I knew what he was capable of. Henry's voice was hoarse. Are you saying my father had her killed? Lady Montclair closed her eyes. I don't know. I never had proof. But after she disappeared, he became distant, angry, as if he carried a terrible weight. Poirot exhaled softly. Then perhaps, madam, that weight did not die with him. Lawrence shook his head. But what does this have to do with Celeste? Poirot's fingers brushed the pendant once more. Perhaps more than we think. Reginald, his face grim, cleared his throat. There is something else. A few months before Marguerite disappeared, she confided in me. She was afraid. She believed someone was watching her. Poirot nodded slowly. The pieces were beginning to take shape. And now, 20 years later, another young woman vanishes. Another maid is silenced. And your pendant, madam, finds itself clutched in the hands of the dead. Lady Montclair's breathing was shallow. You think it's connected. I do not believe in coincidence, madam. The past has a way of resurfacing when we least expect it. A knock at the door interrupted them. One of Hale's officers stepped inside, his expression grim. Inspector, we found something. Hale straightened. Celeste, the officer, shook his head. No, but we found a letter. Hidden in the maid's quarters. He held out a folded piece of parchment. Poirot took it, unfolding it carefully. His eyes skimmed the faded ink, and a slow, knowing expression settled over his face. The letter was decades old. And it was signed with a name that had long been forgotten, Marguerite Dufresne. Poirot looked up, his voice quiet but certain. The past is no longer buried, Mies Amis. And I fear it has come back to finish what it started. Poirot turned the fragile letter over in his hands, the parchment crinkling ever so slightly between his fingers. The ink had faded, but the words remained clear, a whisper from the past that refused to be silenced. The air in the room was thick with tension. The faces around him frozen in varying shades of fear, disbelief, and calculation. Hale leaned in, his impatience barely concealed. "What does it say?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he let the weight of the moment settle, observing each face, each breath, each flicker of emotion. Then he read aloud to the one who finds this. "Know that I am afraid. I can not leave, nor can I stay. He watches me always, and I fear I will never be free. If I am gone, know that I did not run. And if I die, my child must not be forgotten. There is a truth in this house, hidden where no one dares to look. But if one day justice comes, then perhaps my suffering will not have been in vain. I pray that someone will listen." The silence that followed was suffocating. Henry swallowed, his throat bobbing. She knew something was going to happen to her. Poirot inclined his head. And she left behind a clue not in what she said, but in what she did not. Lawrence frowned. "What do you mean?" Poirot's fingers drummed lightly against the paper. "She speaks of a truth, hidden where no one dares to look. That Miss is what interests me most." His gaze swept the room. "Tell me, in all the years you have lived here, has there ever been a place that was, how shall we say, forgotten?" Lady Montclair stiffened. "No, nothing of the sort." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Ah, but madam, I do not believe you." He turned sharply to Reginald, who had remained eerily quiet. "Monsieur, as the one who has walked these halls longer than any other, you know every inch of this house. Is there a place hidden away, a place long abandoned?" Reginald hesitated. Then, slowly, his shoulders sagged. "The east wing," he murmured. Henry's brow furrowed. "But that was closed off years ago." "Precisely," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "And yet, it was not always so." He set the letter down, his fingers steepling. "I suspect whatever happened to Marguerite did not occur outside these walls, but within them. Somewhere she was trapped, hidden, erased." His gaze sharpened. "And I intend to find out where." Inspector Hale exhaled. "All right, but where does that leave us now?" "We're still no closer to finding Celeste." Poirot's expression did not change. "Perhaps we are." A ripple of confusion passed through the room. Poirot took a slow step forward, his voice lowering. "Murder is a crime of passion or necessity. But disappearance? Ah, that is something else entirely. Celeste was taken because she knew too much. And that means," he turned sharply, his eyes locking on to Lady Montclair, "someone in this house feared her knowledge." Lady Montclair's lips pressed into a thin line. "Are you accusing me, Monsieur Poirot?" "Accusing? Non, madam. I am merely observing." His attention shifted subtly. Not to Henry, not to Lawrence, but to Evelyn. She had remained silent through it all, her arms still wrapped around herself, her gaze darting toward the floor. Not once had she spoken out. of turn. Not once had she drawn attention to herself. And yet Poirot had seen it. The slight tremor in her fingers. The way she had shrunk into the background. He took a step toward her. "Mademoiselle Evelyn," he said softly, "why do you tremble?" Evelyn's head snapped up. I don't. Ah. But you do." Poirot tilted his head. "All evening you have been the one who has said the least. And yet I sense your mind is full of things unsaid." He clasped his hands behind his back. "Tell me, mademoiselle, what is it that you fear?" Evelyn's breath hitched. I don't know what you mean." Poirot watched her closely, then made his move. "Celeste knew something," he said. "Something about Marguerite. And I believe that whatever she learned, it frightened someone. But fear, mademoiselle, is not always the fear of being caught." His voice softened. "Sometimes it is the fear of knowing the truth." Evelyn flinched. Poirot pressed forward. "Celeste spoke to you before she disappeared, did she not?" Evelyn's hands clenched at her sides. Tell me what?" she said. Evelyn's breathing quickened. The others were staring at her now, suspicion creeping into their eyes. Her fingers twitched, her mouth opening and closing. Poirot waited. Then, with a shuddering breath, "Evelyn whispered," she said. "She found a birth record." The room froze. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A birth record." Evelyn nodded shakily. She found it hidden in the old ledgers. It was for a child born in this house. A child that was never registered outside these walls. Poirot stepped forward, pushing the door open. The moment his eyes swept over the small table where the evidence had been left, a terrible certainty settled in his chest. The cigarette case was gone. The ledger, which had contained Montague's private financial records, lay open, but the most damning pages had been ripped out, and the letters, the ones that had hinted at something deeper, something more than just a business dispute, gone. Miss Carrington let out a quiet gasp. But how? No one should have been able to get in here. Grimshaw stormed inside, checking behind crates, opening cabinets, searching for anything that might have been discarded. Damn it all. Someone knew exactly what they needed to take. Poirot remained by the doorway, his mind racing. This was not an act of panic. It had been methodical, precise. The removal of those specific pieces of evidence suggested two things. First, the real culprit was still ahead of them, watching, waiting. Second, Hill, guilty or not, was a distraction. Grimshaw swore under his breath. "We were too slow." Poirot lifted a hand. "Non, mon ami. We were just fast enough to scare them." Miss Carrington frowned. "But if the evidence is gone," Poirot turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Gone? No, hidden, perhaps. Altered, maybe, but completely erased." He shook his head. "That is impossible." Grimshaw slammed a fist against the wooden crate beside him. "And what if they threw it overboard? What if we never find it?" Poirot's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Then we make them bring it back." Miss Carrington swallowed. "How?" Poirot turned toward the open doorway, staring into the dimly lit corridor beyond. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, but edged with steel. "We make them believe that." The evidence was never lost at all. The heavy silence in the luggage car pressed down on them like a suffocating fog. Grimshaw was still muttering under his breath, his frustration mounting, while Miss Carrington remained frozen by the doorway, her gloved hands clenched into fists. Poirot, however, had gone very still, his gaze locked on the now empty space, where the stolen evidence had once been, and then, from somewhere in the depths of the train, a scream tore through the night. Miss Carrington flinched. Grimshaw's head snapped up. Poirot, without hesitation, turned on his heel and strode out of the luggage car. The scream had come from the first-class compartments. The wealthy travelers, the ones who, until now, had been watching the investigation unfold from the safety of their polished mahogany walls, convinced that none of this concerned them. By the time they reached the source of the commotion, a small crowd had gathered outside compartment 3B. The door stood ajar, light spilling onto the plush red carpeting. Inside, a woman was sobbing into her hands, her pearl necklace quivering against her heaving chest. Beside her, a trembling porter wrung his cap between his fingers. Grimshaw pushed forward. What happened? The woman, still sobbing, pointed, a shaking finger toward the bed. He was just here. He was right here. Poirot stepped inside. The compartment was lavish, the bedding still indented where someone had recently been lying. A book lay open on the nightstand, a glass of brandy beside it. But the man who had been reading in this room mere moments ago, gone. Poirot's sharp gaze flicked to the porter. You saw him last? The young man swallowed hard. Yes, sir. Mr. Lawrence, he was still here when I brought him his drink not 20 minutes ago. He even tipped me. Grimshaw glanced toward the woman. And you? She sniffled. I was next door in my own compartment. I heard something, a noise, like a struggle, and when I knocked, there was no answer. I opened the door, and her voice cracked. He was gone. That Celeste found a birth record. This must be it. Evelyn nodded, but her expression was troubled. But she said she found a name. She knew who the father was. Poirot's fingers tightened around the fragile paper. Then it means a sudden noise cut through the silence, a heavy thud. Then another, above them. Poirot's head snapped upward. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Someone is here. Hale hissed, reaching for his revolver. Poirot moved swiftly, tucking the papers into his coat before rising. Come, Vite. They hurried back up the stairs, but as they reached the sitting room, a sharp gust of cold air rushed past them. The door they had entered through stood ajar, and in the distance, the sound of footsteps retreating into the night. Poirot surged forward, but as he reached the main hall, his steps faltered. There, in the dim glow of the candlelight, the desk, where he had left Marguerite's letter, lay bare. The letter, the only proof of her final words, was gone. A sharp breath left Poirot's lips. He turned toward the others, his gaze burning. Someone is working against us, he said, his voice eerily calm. And they will not stop until the truth is buried. The chilling wind swept through Montclair Manor, as though it, too, were trying to escape the darkness now consuming the house. Poirot stood frozen for a moment, his sharp eyes scanning the hall. his mind working furiously to piece together the new puzzle laid before him. The letter gone, the motive elusive, and the figure that had fled into the night, whose presence seemed so immediate, was now the key to everything. Mon Dieu, Poirot muttered under his breath. This is only the beginning. Hale, tense and alert, glanced at Poirot with a mixture of confusion and urgency. What's happening here? Another piece of the puzzle vanishes right before our eyes. Poirot turned to face the inspector, his voice low but steady. There is more at play here, much more than we realize. Someone is willing to go to extreme lengths to keep the truth buried. But who? And why? Before Hale could respond, a loud crash erupted from the direction of the library, followed by a muffled shout. The sound was unmistakable. Someone was in trouble. Poirot's instincts kicked in immediately. Without a word, he motioned for Hale to follow and sprinted toward the source of the noise. The library doors were ajar, and as Poirot entered, the scene before him took his breath away. There, sprawled across the floor, was Reginald Montclair, his face a ghastly shade of pale, blood seeping from a wound on his temple. The room, once a place of refined leisure, now seemed to have taken on an atmosphere of impending doom. The bookshelves appeared distorted, as if they, too, sensed something wrong. Hale knelt by Reginald's side, examining the wound. "He's still alive," Hale murmured, pressing a cloth to the bleeding spot. "But barely. What the hell happened?" Here, Poirot surveyed the room, his gaze falling on a small, nearly imperceptible footprint in the dust near the far window. A faint trail led toward the rear of the room, stopping abruptly at a set of double doors that opened onto a terrace. Poirot moved toward it, his mind piecing together the scattered evidence. The culprit, whoever they were, had clearly been here before. The choice of weapon, an old brass candlestick, lying discarded near Reginald's prone body, suggested a crime of opportunity. But Poirot knew better than to be fooled by appearances. This wasn't just an assault. It was part of something much larger, something still unfolding in the shadows. The attacker must have left in a hurry, Poirot murmured. Whoever did this. They knew what they were doing. Just then, a soft creak from the terrace door caught his attention. Poirot turned, his eyes narrowing. A figure stood there, barely illuminated by the flickering light of a nearby candle dot. It was Evelyn. Poirot's heart skipped a beat, his suspicion rising instantly. What was she doing here? She had been nowhere near the library when the disturbance started. She stood still, her expression unreadable, her eyes not meeting his. "I heard a noise," Evelyn said softly. Her voice was strangely calm. I came to see what had happened." Poirot's gaze remained fixed on her, noting the faint tremble in her hand. Her demeanor was too composed for someone who had just discovered a man half dead on the floor. "Are you sure that's all?" Poirot asked, his tone sharp but controlled. Evelyn's eyes flickered for just a moment before she lowered her gaze. Of course. I was in my room." Poirot studied her reaction with unwavering intensity. The slight hesitation, the almost imperceptible shift in posture, something about her story didn't add up. "I think we have been misled," Poirot said quietly, his voice barely a whisper, but full of conviction, before Evelyn could respond. A loud thump echoed from the hallway. The others, who had been gathering outside the room, burst through the door. Inspector Hale moved to Reginald's side, preparing to call for help, while Lawrence quickly moved to shut the doors to the terrace. Ensuring no one could escape, Poirot's mind worked quickly, processing the latest turn of events. Whoever had tried to murder Reginald had been in the room, and now there was only one thing he was sure of: the killer had no intention of stopping here. Poirot stood still, his eyes locked on the others. His thoughts raced back to the birth certificate, to the letter, to the unexplained connections between the suspects. Reginald's injury wasn't an isolated incident. It was the beginning of something darker, a dangerous escalation that threatened to spiral out of control. What we have here is no simple attack, Poirot said, his voice gaining strength. It's a warning. And I believe that the criminal behind this is still in this house, watching us all. Suddenly, a shrill scream cut through the thickening tension, followed by a loud crash from the far side of the manor. Poirot turned toward the source of the sound, his heart racing. There was no time to waste. "Hale," Poirot called. "Come. We must act, and we must act swiftly." The two men rushed through the hallway, their footsteps echoing in the empty space. As they neared the source of the scream, Poirot could hear frantic voices, followed by another crashing sound. They rounded the corner just in time to see the shadowy figure of a person slipping into a darkened room, the door slamming shut behind them. Poirot didn't hesitate. With a swift movement, he reached for the handle and threw the door open. Inside, the scene was chaos. A figure lay on the floor, their back arched unnaturally. The room reeked of something metallic, something too familiar. Blood. Evelyn Montclair. Poirot's chest tightened. The killer had struck again. But this time, the victim was the one person whose innocence had never been in question. And now, the stakes were higher than ever. Poirot stood motionless, his gaze fixed on Evelyn Montclair's lifeless form, sprawled unnaturally across the ornate rug. The room was thick with the metallic scent of blood, the very air seeming to shudder under the weight of the unfolding tragedy. The once imposing manor, so full of whispers and shadows, now felt like a labyrinth of deception with no clear exit. Inspector Hale was the first to move, stepping cautiously into the room, his face drawn tight with concern. "Another one," he muttered, his eyes flicking to Poirot. "It's happening again. The killer is still here, someone who knows this house, knows its secrets." Poirot's eyes didn't leave the body. His mind was already working, weaving through the details that had stacked up, one by one. Evelyn's death was a cruel reminder of the danger that lurked beneath the surface, but Poirot wasn't ready to let the puzzle remain unsolved. He could sense it. Something was shifting. The answers were drawing closer, yet they were still frustratingly elusive. "Evelyn Montclair," Poirot murmured to himself, almost as if repeating the name would conjure some hidden clue. "Why?" Hale turned toward him, his voice urgent. "Poirot, we can't waste time. This is the second death. There's someone among us, someone who—" Poirot raised a hand, silencing the inspector. He was deep in thought, his mind racing over the events that had unfolded. Reginald Montclair, the attempted murder, Evelyn's scream. And now, another body, someone he hadn't fully considered. The answer, it seemed, had been there all along. It wasn't just about the deaths. It wasn't even the obvious relationships between the suspects, the wealth, or the power struggles that seemed to linger beneath the surface. No, the key lay in the details, in the things that had appeared insignificant at first glance. Poirot's gaze flickered around the room, taking in the familiar objects with fresh eyes. The old clock ticking steadily on the wall, the small stack of books that Evelyn had left beside her favorite armchair, the way the curtains fluttered slightly, despite the stillness of the room. Then it struck him. The door it wasn't locked. The small terrace that opened out from the room had always been an escape for the family, at least. It had been for Reginald. And Evelyn, too, had been seen there more than once. But the window hadn't been opened. Why would someone risk being caught by simply walking out? No, the real answer lay in the window left ajar, just slightly, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't that someone had fled. Someone had left without a trace, leaving nothing but a trail of subtle missteps and deliberate misdirections. Poirot turned to Hale, his eyes piercing. The pattern. It is in the details, mon ami. There is something we've all overlooked. Hale, though clearly frustrated, nodded. What do you mean? What's the connection? Poirot strode to the bookshelf, running a finger along its edge, his thoughts aligning. Then, with a sudden burst of insight, he grabbed a book from the shelf and flipped it open. The letter, Poirot said, half to himself. It was never meant to be found, but it was. Whoever orchestrated this wanted it to be discovered, to point us down a path that led to nothing. But the letter was never the key. It was a distraction, a message hidden in plain sight. Hale watched him, his confusion evident. But how does this connect with Evelyn? Poirot's lips tightened. Evelyn was not the victim, Hale. She was a warning, a step in a larger game. The key is not in the murders themselves, but in the method. The killer is meticulous. They have been carefully orchestrating every event to push us toward a certain conclusion, but their true intentions remain obscured. What we need to focus on is the family's history, their relationships, not just the immediate threat. He paced for a moment, piecing together the clues. The connection between the Montclairs and their tragic past, the hint of an inheritance, the power struggles, and the strange, almost invisible line that linked the deaths of the two victims. Evelyn's murder was not random. Neither was Reginald's attack. Poirot's eyes lit with sudden clarity. There is a hidden pattern, one we haven't fully understood until now. It's in the way the family operates. The power, the deception, the years of rivalry. It is all about the inheritance, but not in the way we thought. Hale looked back at him, brow furrowed, trying to keep up with Poirot's mental leap. But the inheritance was meant to go to Reginald, wasn't it? Poirot nodded slowly. But Reginald was never meant to live. His was the first step in a larger game. The inheritance, mon ami, was never the true prize. The truth was that the killer didn't care about wealth or power. Not really. They cared about control, about the past. Evelyn's death had sealed the game. but not in the way anyone had expected. Reginald's injury had been a means to an end, a stepping stone. But Evelyn had been the final piece, her death orchestrated by a family member with deep ties too. The Montclair legacy. Poirot turned to Hale, his voice sharp with realization. We have been blind to what has been right in front of us. Someone close to the family has been pulling the strings all along. The pattern emerges now, Hale. The realization hit hard. Reginald, Evelyn, and the others were just pawns. The game had started long before Poirot arrived. Someone was moving the pieces with expert precision, leaving behind only traces of their methodical machinations. Poirot knew that time was running out. The killer was still out there, playing the game with deadly seriousness. The question was no longer just who the killer was, it was who, in the Montclair family, was desperate enough to erase the past to ensure their future, and Poirot would. Be damned if he didn't uncover the answer before it was too late. Poirot's gaze lingered on the faces of the Montclair family, each one a portrait of well-masked emotions, each one a potential suspect. The air in the manor had grown heavy with suspicion, a suffocating fog that no one seemed able to dispel. Evelyn Montclair's death had revealed a web of lies and half-truths, but it was the discovery of an underlying truth hidden beneath layers of deceit that would reveal the killer's true motives. Poirot's mind raced, piecing together fragments of conversations, reactions, and behaviors. It wasn't the money, the inheritance, or the power struggle that had triggered this sequence of events. No, the truth was darker, more insidious. The killer wasn't motivated by greed alone, but by something far more personal, something rooted. Deep within the Montclair family's history, he stood in the drawing room, hands clasped behind his back, his thoughts tightening into focus. Hale paced in front of him, agitated and impatient. "You've found something, haven't you?" he asked, his voice strained. "You know what this is about." Poirot turned slowly, his eyes locking onto Hale's. There was no hurry in his voice, no rush to explain. "I know, yes, but there is more to the story, Hale. Something far more subtle." The inspector stopped, brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean, Poirot? What could be more subtle than this?" Poirot raised a finger, his face serious. "It is not about the surface, mon ami. You see, the family's history is not only about wealth. It is about betrayal, about something far more fragile, their sense of identity, their very connection to each other. The true motive lies not in material gain, but in the desire for something much deeper." Hale shook his head, still struggling to understand. "And what is that something?" Poirot's lips curled into a small, thoughtful smile. "It is love, Hale. Or perhaps obsession." The words struck Hale like a cold gust of wind. He took a step back, as though the realization had physically hit him. "You can't mean it. Love? After all that's happened?" Poirot nodded, his gaze sweeping the room once more. "Yes. You see, the true motive is not merely about revenge, nor about greed. The killer's actions are rooted in a desire to possess something that was lost long ago, a relationship, a connection that should have been theirs, but was taken from them in the most brutal of ways. It clicked for Hale then. He remembered the long-guarded secrets of the Montclair family, hidden scandals, whispered rumors of a romance that had never seen the light of day. It was the relationship between Reginald Montclair and his wife, Evelyn's older sister, Margaret. But Margaret had mysteriously disappeared years ago, never to be spoken of again. Poirot saw the dawning comprehension in Hale's eyes. Yes, Hale. Margaret was more than just a sister to Evelyn, and more than just the missing piece of this twisted puzzle. She was the object of someone's desire, someone who could never have her, someone who watched her from the shadows as she drifted further away. The details were still raw in Hale's mind, but now, as Poirot laid them bare, it was clear. Margaret had been loved not in a simple, innocent way, but in a dark, possessive way. And when Margaret left, when she chose to marry Reginald, someone had been left behind, consumed with rage and jealousy. The killer, whoever they were, had been watching ever since, waiting for the moment when they could exact their revenge. Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. This is not simply a tale of murder. It is a story of unrequited love, of twisted obsession, and of jealousy that has festered for years, quietly waiting for its moment to erupt. Hale stood in stunned silence, his mind still processing what Poirot was saying. He had suspected the Montclairs' tangled relationships, the secret animosities that lurked beneath their polished facades. But this revelation, that the killer was driven by a love turned ugly, was far beyond what he had anticipated. Poirot's eyes shifted back to the family portraits hanging on the walls, their smiling faces mocking the tragedy that had unfolded. "Look at them, Hale," he said, his voice soft. "The ones who are still here, still pretending to grieve. They each play their part in this carefully constructed faud, but beneath it all, they are as hollow as the walls that surround them." Suddenly, Poirot's eyes narrowed. One of them is hiding something. They know more than they're letting on. He moved quickly toward the door, his footsteps deliberate. "We must speak to them all. The truth is out there, and it will not stay hidden for long." The investigation had always seemed like a puzzle with missing pieces, but now the pieces were falling into place. As Poirot's sharp mind connected the dots between motives, emotions, and past betrayals, the true nature of the crime emerged with startling clarity. The Montclair family was caught in a web of jealousy, of a love turned to obsession, and someone had been willing to kill to possess what was lost. Hale followed Poirot, his mind whirling with the implications. But who, Poirot, who among them is capable of such a thing? Poirot's expression was unreadable, his eyes scanning the group of family members as they sat in the drawing room, eyes red from crying, faces contorted in grief. That, mon ami, is exactly what we will find out in the silence that followed. Poirot's mind began to unravel the last, delicate threads of the Montclair family's tragic tale. The killer had been driven by more than just a thirst for vengeance. They were driven by a desire to possess, to reclaim something that had been stolen from them long ago. And it would be this broken love, this twisted obsession, that would ultimately lead Poirot to the truth. The real killer was closer than anyone had realized, and they were ready to strike again. The evening was growing darker, the shadows long and heavy across the Montclair estate. Poirot stood by the grand window, his eyes scanning the sprawling grounds, his mind focused entirely on the task at hand. The pieces of the puzzle had finally fallen into place, but there was still one final step before the truth could be revealed. It was time to set the trap. The Montclair family, already shaken by the string of tragedies, remained in the drawing room, their eyes darting nervously as Poirot and Hale entered. There was a new air about the manor, one of expectation, as if everyone knew the end was near. Yet no one dared voice it. Poirot's calm demeanor was almost an affront to the mounting tension in the room. He took a deep breath, his eyes briefly meeting those of each family member. Evelyn's sister, Margaret, had been the key all along, but she was not the one Poirot sought to confront, not yet, anyway. The true villain of the tale had been playing the role of a victim, a role so convincing that it had allowed them to operate in the shadows, manipulating everyone, even Poirot. In subtle ways, Poirot stepped forward, his every movement deliberate, measured. "I must ask you all to remain calm," he said, his voice firm, yet gentle. "The truth will soon come to light, and the perpetrator of this terrible crime will face justice. I have, as you say, gathered the pieces, and I now know who among you is responsible for Evelyn's death." The family stiffened, their breaths held, and Poirot could almost feel the collective pulse quicken in the room. But it was not fear that gripped them, it was the sharp bite of anxiety, of knowing that their carefully constructed masks would soon slip, exposing the raw reality beneath. They had all been living in a house of lies, and now it was crumbling. Around them, Poirot turned his attention to Reginald Montclair, the patriarch of the family, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. The tension in his jaw was unmistakable, but there was something more, a flicker of guilt, fleeting but unmistakable. Poirot's lips curled into a small smile. "Reginald, I believe you are the one who has been hiding the most." Reginald's eyes widened, his face paling. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, his voice shaky. "This is madness." "You think—" "No, mon ami," Poirot interjected, his tone as calm as ever. "It is not madness. It is the truth, which, as you know, always comes to light in the end." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You have been hiding something very important, something that I now understand." Reginald's eyes darted around the room, seeking support from his family, but none of them dared meet his gaze. Poirot's expression softened. "You were in love with Margaret, weren't you?" The words hung in the air, heavy and thick, like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Reginald stiffened, his face flushing with anger and shame. What? Are you insinuating?" He growled, his voice rising. "You're not just her brother-in-law, Reginald. You are much more than that," Poirot continued, his gaze never leaving Reginald's. "Margaret was the one you loved, and when she chose your brother, your jealousy turned to rage. You could not let go of her, even after she disappeared." A flicker of panic crossed Reginald's face. Poirot could see it, like a shadow moving beneath the surface. "You did not want to be cast aside," Poirot said, his voice low, almost gentle. "And so you killed Evelyn. But it was not just an act of revenge. It was an act of desperation. You wanted to destroy the memory of Margaret's love for your brother. You wanted to erase her, and in doing so, you could somehow reclaim her for yourself. Reginald's hands shook, his breath coming faster now. No, I didn't know. You're wrong. You have no idea what you're talking about. Poirot remained unflinching. But I do, Reginald. I know exactly what I'm talking about. You were the one who orchestrated Evelyn's death. You killed her not just to hurt your brother, but to punish her for something she could not control. The love that was never yours to have. For a moment, there was silence, the weight of Poirot's words settling over the room. Then, without warning, Reginald stood up, his chair scraping loudly across the floor. His face twisted in rage, and he turned toward the door. Reginald, do not make this worse for yourself, Poirot warned, his voice still calm. But firm, Reginald's eyes flicked toward the door, his hand hovering over the handle. But something in Poirot's gaze held him there, rooted to the spot. He knew, deep down, that escape was no longer an option. He had been caught in the web of his own making, and there was no way out now. The room held its collective breath as Reginald slowly turned back to face Poirot. His chest heaved, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and anger. You don't know what she did to me, he spat, his voice breaking. She destroyed me, Poirot. She took everything I wanted, everything I needed. And when I couldn't have her, I lost my mind. I couldn't live with it. Poirot nodded solemnly. And so you decided to destroy the woman who stood between you and the woman you wanted. But you did not count on the fact that others would be watching, others who would see through your lies. Reginald's eyes flickered with panic. No, but before he could finish, Hale stepped forward, his hand resting on his shoulder. It's over, Reginald. You're under arrest for the murder of Evelyn Montclair. There was no resistance, no desperate attempt to flee. Reginald stood there, broken, his shoulders sagging in defeat. The tension that had gripped the room for so long slowly began to dissipate, leaving behind an overwhelming sense of relief. Poirot stood, still composed, knowing that he had finally put the final pieces into place. A.S. Hale led Reginald out of the room. Poirot turned toward the remaining family members. They were shaken, but they knew that the storm had passed. The truth had come to light, and justice would soon follow. Poirot's work was done. And as the evening light faded into darkness, he knew that even in the deepest shadows, the truth would always find its way into the light. Poirot stood quietly, his fingers delicately pressed together in the familiar pose that had served him through so many cases. The Montclair estate felt quieter now, the storm that had raged in the hearts of the family finally giving way to a brittle calm. But even as the authorities led Reginald away, his face etched with defeat, Poirot could not shake the feeling that something remained unresolved. He turned toward the fireplace, the embers glowing faintly in the dim room. The case, for all intents and purposes, was closed. Reginald had confessed his rage, his jealousy, all laid bare for the world to see. But the stillness in the room, the weight in the air, suggested that the final note had yet to be struck. It was Hale who broke the silence. He stepped forward, his voice quiet, but with a hint of disbelief. Poirot, You don't look relieved. We've solved it. It's over. Reginald confessed. It's done. Poirot glanced at Hale, his gaze thoughtful. Ah, mon ami, I wish it were so simple. I have seen cases where the truth lies in the most obvious places, and yet there is always something beneath. Something overlooked. Hale frowned, looking towards the door where Reginald had been led away. You think there's more to this? I don't understand. The evidence was clear. Reginald killed Evelyn because of his twisted obsession with Margaret. That's it. That's the story. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he paced toward the window. His mind was alive with the details, the contradictions, the way the pieces had fallen into place so smoothly, and yet something gnawed at him. Then a sound broke through the air, a faint noise, barely perceptible. A soft scraping, followed by a sharp click. Poirot's instincts kicked into overdrive, and in a moment he turned on his heel. His eyes darted around the room, landing on the desk in the corner where papers had been left undisturbed. But one paper was missing. Mon Dieu, Poirot whispered, his pulse quickening. It was not over. It cannot be over before Hale could react. Poirot moved swiftly across the room, his eyes scanning every inch of the space with laser focus. His fingers brushed against the edge of the desk where the missing sheet of paper had once been. He turned toward Hale, his face grave. That paper, it was there earlier just before we made the arrest. And now it is gone. Someone took it. Hale's confusion deepened. Took it? But why? There's nothing there that could change anything. We have the confession. Reginald, Poirot held up a hand, silencing Hale. He stepped toward the door, pausing just before the threshold. Reginald's confession, yes. But I believe we have been deceived. The true mastermind was never Reginald. No, he was merely a pawn in a much larger game. A cold feeling settled in the room as Poirot's words sank in. Hale's face twisted with confusion, but Poirot moved forward, beckoning him to follow. They crossed the hallway, and Poirot stopped outside a study door, the one where the Montclair family often gathered. There, standing in the doorway, was Margaret Montclair, her face pale and her eyes wide with shock. Poirot's gaze was piercing, and he felt an unsettling stillness in his bones. Ah, Mademoiselle Margaret, I had hoped we would not need to speak again. But you see, the game is far from over. Margaret's lips trembled, and for the first time, Poirot saw the fear in her eyes. I don't know what you mean, she stammered, taking a step back as if to flee. But Poirot was unrelenting. You have been the architect of this entire scheme, have you not? Margaret's face froze, her eyes betraying a flicker of panic before she quickly masked it with a practiced calm. What are you talking about? Reginald, he confessed. It's over. You can't. You are a clever woman, Margaret. Poirot interrupted, his voice calm but certain. But your plans have unraveled. Reginald was not the true murderer. No, it was you all along. You played the role of the grieving widow, the victim, to perfection. But your true motive has finally come to light. Margaret's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. Poirot's gaze softened, but his mind was sharp. You wanted Evelyn dead, not out of jealousy or rage, but out of a much more insidious desire, a desire for power, a desire to control the Montclair legacy. You knew Reginald's obsession with you, and you used that to your advantage. You pushed him, manipulating his emotions, guiding his every step. And when Evelyn was in your way, you set him up as the perfect scapegoat. You knew he would never resist your will. And when he killed her, you would be left free, unscathed. Hale stood in shock, his mouth slightly agape, while Margaret's face had gone completely pale. She staggered back, a laugh rising in her throat, but it was hollow, lacking any true amusement. You really thought you had it all figured out, didn't you, Poirot? She asked, her voice trembling. You thought it was Reginald all along. You played right into my hands. Poirot's eyes remained steady, his gaze unwavering. Not all, mademoiselle. Not all. I knew Reginald's guilt was too easy, too simple. But I did not expect you to be so confident, so careless in your own deception. Margaret's eyes narrowed, but the fear was there, a tremor running through her. You won't get away with this. You don't understand. You can't, but I do understand, Poirot said softly, his eyes narrowing with finality. You are not a victim of love, nor of obsession. You were a schemer, a manipulator. And now the truth will come out, and justice will be served. Margaret's facade crumbled in an instant. The fear, the desperation, the shame all flooded her expression, leaving her standing exposed, her manipulations laid bare. She didn't resist as Hale took her by the arm, leading her away, but her eyes, full of unspoken hatred, burned into Poirot's soul. As she was led out, Poirot turned to Hale with a small, knowing smile. It was never about Evelyn, you see. It was always about control. Margaret wanted to inherit the Montclair wealth and power, and she would stop at nothing to get it. Not even murder. Hale nodded, the weight of the revelation settling in. The case, so neatly wrapped up just moments ago, had now spiraled into a new, unexpected direction. But for Poirot, the puzzle had finally been solved. The last piece had fallen into place, and the true mastermind was now in custody. He sighed softly, a sense of satisfaction washing over him as he watched the family's dark secrets come to light. It is a fitting end, Poirot murmured to himself. The truth is often hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to be uncovered, and with that, the case of the Montclair family was finally, and forever, closed. Poirot stood in the dim light of the interrogation room, his mind still spinning with the final revelations. Margaret Montclair's confession, though expected, had brought with it a rush of conflicting emotions. On one hand, there was a quiet satisfaction in seeing the puzzle pieces fit together. On the other, the growing sense that justice might not fully be served troubled him deeply. He had long understood that the true resolution of a case was rarely as simple as the convict's fate. Often, it lay in the unspoken intricacies of the world beyond the crime. Hale, still processing the shock of the past few hours, shifted uneasily beside him. So that's it then. Margaret's the one behind it all. Poirot nodded slowly. His eyes focused on the distant shadows cast by the flickering lamp. Yes, she is the one. The mastermind behind it all, though she relied on Reginald for the final act. But her true motive, her desire to control the Montclair legacy, was masked by a carefully constructed web of lies and manipulation. But she confessed. Hale pointed out, his brow furrowed. Doesn't that mean the case is closed? We've got her. She's going to pay for what she's done. Poirot's lips thinned, and he glanced over at Hale, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on him. You see, mon ami, the case is rarely as clean as it seems at first. Reginald confessed to a crime he did not commit, and Margaret was more than willing to play the role of the grieving widow. But what if there's more at stake here than just this one crime? What if, in fact, there's something deeper we've missed? Something still hidden? Hale frowned. You mean you don't think this is over? You still think there's something we've missed? Poirot's gaze sharpened, and his voice lowered as if speaking more to himself than to Hale. A case like this does not leave behind such perfect answers, not without consequences. We have found the culprit, yes, but something lingers, something just out of sight. It has all the marks of a story left unfinished. Hale opened his mouth to speak, but Poirot held up a hand to silence him. Slowly, Poirot moved toward the door, his mind running over the events that had unfolded. Reginald, the jealous lover. Margaret, the cunning widow. But there had been something about the way she spoke, the way her eyes darted when the subject of Evelyn's death was broached. Something in her tone that didn't quite match her words. Poirot had been in the business of reading people for long enough to know that it was often the smallest of details that most would overlook that held the truth. And there was one detail, one small discrepancy, that had gnawed at him since the beginning of this ordeal. The missing sheet of paper from the desk. He hadn't shared this thought with anyone, not even with Hale, because at the time it seemed like just a fleeting observation. But now, in the quiet aftermath of Margaret's confession, that missing paper was beginning to feel more like a deliberate signal than a mere accident. Come, Poirot said, his voice suddenly commanding. We must return to the scene of the crime at the Montclair estate. I fear the story is not yet complete. Hale looked at him with confusion, but followed nonetheless, the urgency in Poirot's stride leaving little room for argument. They arrived at the estate as the final remnants of daylight faded, leaving the house bathed in shadows. Poirot's keen eyes scanned the surroundings, everything eerily still, as if holding its breath. They entered the study, the room where Margaret had been confronted, and Poirot immediately began to search with renewed focus. His eyes flicked from one corner to another, his mind working swiftly to reconstruct the timeline, to piece together the fragments of the puzzle. He turned over a few papers scattered across the desk, his hand pausing on the last sheet. Here, he murmured, almost to himself. This is it. Hale leaned over, peering at the sheet in Poirot's hand. It was a legal document, nothing out of the ordinary at first glance. But then Poirot's trained eye caught something that sent a chill through him. The ink on the document was still fresh. Too fresh. It didn't match the rest of the papers, and it wasn't in Margaret's handwriting. The will, Poirot said, his voice steady, but his heart quickening. This document was altered just after Evelyn's death. It changes everything. Hale's brow furrowed as he glanced between Poirot and the will. What do you mean? What's in it? Poirot didn't answer immediately. His mind was racing as the realization began to settle. The will had been altered to exclude Evelyn, leaving Margaret with control over the estate. Margaret had been clever enough to manipulate Reginald into thinking he was the one who was doomed by his obsession, but she had also gone one step further, ensuring her own position of power by changing the legal documents that would grant her everything she wanted: the confession she had given, the emotional breakdown in the face of accusation. It had all been an act. The true crime wasn't just about Evelyn's life, but about her legacy. Margaret had engineered everything from Reginald's misplaced guilt to the murder itself in a way that ensured her complete dominion over the Montclair fortune. Poirot exhaled slowly, the full weight of it all pressing down on him. Margaret's confession was a carefully constructed performance. She knew the authorities would buy it, that they would focus on Reginald's obsession. But the real game, her final play, was in the legal documents. She had everything planned. Hale stepped back, his face pale as the depth of the revelation settled in. You mean she didn't just murder Evelyn? Poirot nodded. She didn't just kill to silence Evelyn. She killed to take what was rightfully hers, what she believed was her inheritance. Reginald was nothing but a tool to get her there. A cold silence hung between them. Hale struggled to comprehend the twisted layers of manipulation and greed that Poirot had just uncovered. He had suspected on some level that Margaret was no mere grieving widow, but the true extent of her machinations had eluded him. Poirot turned toward the door, his hand resting on the doorknob, but his mind already several steps ahead. We must go to the police. There is no more time to waste. If we wait, the truth may be lost forever. Margaret must not be allowed to slip away. As they made their way back to the car, Poirot's mind was already planning the next move. The case wasn't over, not yet. Justice had been delayed, but Poirot would not allow the villain to escape the consequences of her actions. The truth was always meant to come out, no matter how long it took, and with that resolve in his heart, Poirot drove into the night, knowing that the final act was about to unfold, and justice, however long delayed, would be served. The sun had long dipped below the horizon by the time Poirot's car glided through the quiet streets, its headlights casting long shadows against the walls. Hale, sitting beside him, remained silent, the weight of their recent discovery still pressing heavily upon him. The case had drawn to a close with a shocking conclusion, but Poirot's mind, as always, was already turning over the next set of questions. It was in his nature to never let go of the smallest detail, the one thing that could upend everything. The road stretched ahead, empty and silent. The hum of the engine seemed like a distant, almost comforting sound. Hale finally broke the silence, his voice uncertain. Poirot, are we sure this is really it? I mean, Margaret confessed. She altered the will. It all makes sense, right? Poirot's eyes flickered to him for a brief moment, and then returned to the road ahead. He didn't answer immediately. The detective was far too accustomed to these moments of reflection, these pauses before the final decision, where everything hung on a single thread of doubt. It was in these pauses that Poirot made his most crucial observations. "You see, Hale," Poirot began, his tone quieter, now contemplative. "In cases like this, the human mind, with its complexities, often leaves behind traces tiny fragments that others might miss. And those fragments are what I seek, what I always seek." Hale glanced at him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "You found the documents. You found the truth. Margaret's motives are clear." Poirot nodded, but the faintest trace of doubt clouded his expression. "Yes, we have uncovered the truth, but sometimes in the very process of solving a case, one begins to wonder if there are other motives, hidden motives, still to be discovered." Hale looked at him more intently now. "You think there's more to this?" Poirot's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. "Not more, perhaps, but a detail, small as it may be, that still needs to be addressed. Something in Margaret's confession, something in her actions, does not sit entirely right with me. But it is not yet clear what." The car slowed as they approached the turnoff for the police station, the lights of the building casting an almost ghostly glow against the night. Hale felt a shiver run down his spine as he glanced back at Poirot, his mind still trying to piece together the fragments of the investigation. "What do you think this all means, Poirot?" Poirot exhaled softly, his gaze never leaving the road. "It means, my friend, that the story we think we know is never quite as simple as it seems. The truth is rarely so neat. Even when it appears finished, there is always something that lingers." As they reached the station, Poirot parked the car and stepped out, the cool night air brushing against his face. Hale followed, his footsteps heavy behind him. As they entered the building, the weight of the finality of their actions seemed to sink into their bones. Margaret would face justice, the estate would be settled, and the Montclair legacy would eventually fade into the history books, but Poirot couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more. He had learned long ago that in his line of work, justice often came with a price. In the stillness of the night, he wondered if the case had truly been solved, or if they were merely catching the threads of a much larger web. Inside the station, Poirot made his way to the chief's office. There, they were greeted with a flood of formalities, briefings, and handshakes. But Poirot remained distant, his mind still adrift in the labyrinth of the case. While the paperwork was being handled, Poirot found himself glancing at the window, watching the night sky. Something tugged at him, a sensation he couldn't quite define. Suddenly, his attention snapped back to Hale, who had returned from a conversation with one of the officers. Hale's expression was strange, almost guarded. "Poirot," he said, his voice low, "there's something strange." The lab reports came back. Something about the evidence from Evelyn's office. "It doesn't match the timeline." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "It's the ink," Hale said, his brow furrowed. "The note from Evelyn's desk, the one we thought was her last letter, well, it's not hers." The handwritings. Wrong, but there's more. The ink. It's not from the time we thought it was. The tests suggest it's more recent than Evelyn's death. Poirot froze, the words settling into his mind like ice water. Recent. Hale nodded grimly. Yes. And that's not all. The officer who found it well, he mentioned something about another document, one that was missing. Something that had been taken out of the room before anyone could get to it. Poirot turned away quickly, his mind racing once more. The pieces of the puzzle, so neatly arranged just moments ago, now seemed to scatter in all directions. His fingers tapped an invisible rhythm on the edge of the desk as he thought, the intensity of the moment growing with every second. There was still something to this case, something they had missed or worse, something they had overlooked. Do you think? Hale started, his voice trailing off. Do you think there's more to the Montclair legacy than we thought? Poirot didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood up slowly, his eyes flicking across the room, as though searching for something unseen. The shadows of the station seemed to shift in the dim light, and Poirot felt a familiar, unsettling sensation, a feeling that something was waiting, just beyond the edge of their understanding. He could sense it, like a whisper in the wind. A riddle half formed, teasing the edges of his consciousness. We must return to the Montclair estate, Poirot said quietly, his voice low but resolute. There is one more thing to find, one more piece of the puzzle. We have only seen the surface, my friend. The depths are yet to be revealed. Hale, now visibly troubled, nodded and followed Poirot out the door. As they stepped into the night, Poirot's heart quickened with the anticipation of the unknown. The case had not ended. No, it had only just begun. The mystery, whatever it was, lingered in the air, waiting for them to find it, and somewhere in the silence of the night, the shadow of a new mystery was already forming, ready to reveal itself when the time was right.